Welcome to another episode of Lakeside Drive, an F1 podcast focused on you, the listener. In this episode, we're previewing the French Grand Prix. And I'm joined by my friend and yours, Thomas J. Campy. G'day, mate.
How are you, mate? You well?
I'm very well. Thank you.
Well.
Thank you. It's good to be here in person
Finally.
with you as well, listener. And thank you so much for watching this on YouTube. If you're here and you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Makes a huge difference to us. TJC, lots is going on at the moment, my man. It's been a couple of weeks since we've had you on the podcast. Now, there has been some interesting conversation going on around McLaren, Daniel Ricciardo. That hasn't really stopped since we spoke last. I'd like to get your view on it, your hot take, your hot tip, if I can, about your thoughts on what is an ongoing situation.
Yeah, look, Colton Herta just tested last week too. He had 2 days at Portimao, and from all accounts, he was spectacular. He was driving last year's car. He didn't really say he felt the limit at times, but couldn't really push any harder as he's getting used to the car. So, doesn't look good for Danny Rick and its future after next year, unless he pulls something out of the bag. But Zach Brown did an interview with an Australian chick over here. What was her name?
Jess
Yates, is that it? And really open conversation. She asked a question. You criticised Daniel, what's going on? And he said, the media blew it. Zach Brown said the media blew it up a bit. It was more about they are committed to Daniel, and Daniel is committed to them. The working environment's great. They're all working hard. They're all pushing forward for the same things, but Zach's comments were exactly the same as Daniel's comments behind closed doors, that they're not where they want to be. It's not the car that he wants to drive. They're not giving him the car he wants to drive, but Daniel's not performing the way he wants to perform too. I think it's just an open and honest conversation about really where they're at. From all accounts, behind closed doors, everything's hunky-dory and they love each other. Daniel has the option for next year. I don't think he'll walk. He released a statement in the last couple of days on Twitter or Instagram too, saying, I'm not going anywhere. I love this sport. So I don't think next year it'll be a Lando Ricciardo show. Moving on from that into 2024 and beyond could be a different story, but I think McLaren's got another chance to get rid of the car design they've got this year, make a step forward, and then hopefully the Mercedes engine will catapult them to where they want to be next year. Because I think if you look at the Mercedes engine across the board, those teams are struggling, and they're the worst 4 teams on the grid. So when you look at Williams, Aston Martin, McLaren, and who's the other one? And the works team, I mean, it's the Ferrari engines like the Haas's that are making the jumps that we saw AlphaTauri and that do last year. So, look, it's interesting. It's hard to watch as a fan. It's bloody tough to be a Bombers fan, an All Blacks fan, and a Daniel Ricciardo fan at the moment. Seem to be shitting the bed at every stage possible. It's tough to watch sport. It was good to see Cam Smith get a win last night in the golf.
Yes, how good. We should start a golfing podcast purely based on his win alone.
Not a golfing man at all, but I can tell you what, I was up all night last night watching it, so it was good.
I love when he raised the trophy and he said, I can tell you what, I'm going to be seeing how many beers fit into this for sure. Love the Australianness of that. Campy, I've got this question for you because it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. And for me, it almost feels like Daniel's on the path of Mark Webber. Hurts me to say. The only problem is he didn't have a 2010 I almost won the world championship moment. Now, McLaren is currently 4th in the standings with 81 points. Alpine is currently 5th in the standings with 81 points. Now, historically, if we looked at Renault and the design development of that car when he was with Nico Hülkenberg, as well as Esteban Ocon, it was very clear, wasn't it, that Daniel was the top driver in that team. So in your mind, was it almost a shame to leave a works team, a manufacturer team, because that's what it is, to go to a customer team where it hasn't been that? I mean, we encouraged him to go to McLaren, didn't we? So it's all our fault instead of Ferrari.
He should have done everything we said not to do.
Yeah.
You know?
Classic.
We're all the big stuff when it comes to Danny Rick, we've got wrong. We said stay away from Ferrari, and well, look where we egg on our face there. So.
It's an interesting moment, though, is thinking about Alpine's development, isn't it? Because is it fair to say that where they sort of were last year, and I mean big beluga-looking airbot thing on top of the car, which was very ridiculous, Danny would have had input into that design, into that development. Esteban Ocon has achieved great things in this car, and he's not as good a driver as Daniel Ricciardo. I mean, this is obviously what could have been. But 2024 comes up, brand new season for him, for DR, I mean. There was conversations at Renault that said, if Daniel ever wanted to come back, we'd have welcomed him with open arms. But now they've got 2 junior Australians, not just DR. Is there any chance that DR ever makes it back to a works team?
I don't think so. No, unfortunately, Mercedes is sewn up for the near future. I mean, if Hamilton decides to retire, I don't know who replaces him. Who war game this out with me? Who would replace someone at Mercedes at the moment? Who's in their junior categories coming through? That
well, that's a great question.
Or who? But Mercedes haven't historically replaced a new driver coming into the works team. It's already someone in their system lined up through. So if you look at the Mercedes drivers on the grid, you've got Albon, and he's got it over Latifi. There's no way Latifi's going to a works team. You've got Vettel and Stroll. Vettel's past it. There's no way Mercedes are putting Stroll in the top team. The other McLaren team is Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo, and the logical at the moment would be take Lando. So it's a Lando and George show.
What happens if they look external to Nick de Vries and Stoffel Van Dorn?
It's not going to happen. Mercedes aren't going to put an unproven F1 driver without 2 or 3 years experience into their top team. That's the only spot that's going to open up. Red Bull's sold, Ferrari's done, and they're the 3 cars that you really want to be in on track record. McLaren has a big history, but they haven't done a lot since 1999 to
2008.
98. Or 2008 with Hamilton.
Yeah.
But it's different. They were a works team then with a Mercedes motor.
Exactly right.
And, before that was the Mika Hakkinen era, before Schumacher's dominance. If you look at the team and the organisation since then, they haven't done a lot. I understand why they made the Honda move when they did, because they had to. That relationship was broken. But in hindsight, look at them now. I mean, if Alonso didn't stuff that relationship up, would they have continued? I think it was the right call to make at the time. No one was saying it. But this year, first year of new regs, and the Mercedes engine being the worst engine on the grid, well, who knows? What do you do? Danny's in a hard spot at the moment. He's not racing for his career at the moment, but next year he is. And if he's having the same performances that he's had in the last 18 months, next year, well, that's almost right off your career. And he's not going to go back to he's not going to do a Kimi or a Valtteri and go back to an Alfa Romeo, because why would you?
Yeah.
He's been in a top organisation for his whole life. So, with the exception of HRT and AlphaTauri when he made his debut for those Toro Rosso for the first 3 years of his career. So, it's a tough one. We know he's got it in him. I don't think he's dropped off that much. I think it's the car. And the car's just not working for the way he wants it. And we've talked about that all year. It's not the car that he wants. He wants a Red Bull design, massive rake. He wants to be able to throw that car in with the front end and control that oversteer so the back end's not kicking out. But that's not the sort of car they've got. They've got a car that's shocking under braking. The understeer completely is against Danny Rick's driving style. When he throws it in, the car just oversteers everywhere and the back end's trying to step out under braking. It's a pig of a car to drive. But Lando's getting the job done. So it's tough to watch.
It is tough to watch. Very hard from an Australian point of view. But we're keen to know your thoughts, actually. And the best place to do that is Discord. So jump across to our Discord server if you're not already part of the community. There's a good 350 of us over there. Yep. We're now doing daily polls, daily questions, all about Formula One, about the show, about all that sort of other stuff. Really great way to engage with us. You'll find both of us on there as well. You'll find Tommy T, Freya, and Dave Munnis too. Now let's talk a little bit about this bloody flexi wings, bloody flexi floors, bloody flexi anything on a Formula One car, Campy. We said last episode that we'd have a bit of a chat this week about this flexi floor, the stopper.
Yep.
What is going on with it? Where are the gains, and who's taken advantage of it?
Well, it looks like Ferrari and Red Bull are the ones that have taken advantage of it. Essentially, it's a plank underneath the floor, which is not supposed. If you read the rules, it's really straight and clear. There's to be no flex in the plank underneath the car. They take they take a measurement of where the flex. It's right at the front of the car, and then just forward of where your bum would be when you're driving. But that leaves a whole 1.8 meters back on this plank at the rear of the car, which they don't check. Now, it seems to me that Red Bull and Ferrari have got enough flex in the rear part of this plank, which allows the car to almost drop down another 2 or 3 mil, which is where the best downforce is created, is when your car's on the ground. If you look at them through corners, they are so much lower to the ground than every other car on the grid. Look at a McLaren, and there's a visible gap, and on the right angle you can see right underneath the car. You cannot do that with a Ferrari or with a Red Bull car. So what this new technical development, technical regulations coming through is stopping that flex on the rear. So I presume they're going to be putting some sensors and some measuring sticks about where they are flexed to try and combat it. They say it's for porpoising, but it's to bring back the dominance of the Ferrari and Red Bull this year, which we have seen. We see it every year in Formula One. It's not anything new. People will kick up a whinge and say, "Oh, Mercedes is doing this." Well, they do it to Mercedes with engine modes and those sort of things too. Speaking to a few people behind closed doors, it sounds like the engine mode rule is really holding Mercedes back at the moment. They've got a hell of a lot more performance in it, but they don't have the sustained reliability over a race to race the cars in some of those modes that they've had previously as well. So, look, the FIA and the F1 is always going to peg back teams that are further in front to create more driving. And if you look at the gains that Mercedes have made, particularly in the last 3 races, not so much in Austria, but they've been a hell of a lot closer on race pace. Silverstone, look, Hamilton was battling right the way there, right for podiums, and it was close. I know some on-track things happen, but the race pace, they seem to have jumped that, 3 or 4 tenths a lap better than what they had been going all year. So it wouldn't surprise me if Mercedes, if this rule does come to pass and it does show some fruition, that Mercedes will jump up again and potentially close that gap even more. I still think that the Ferraris and Red Bulls have it on race pace over them, but hey, some jeopardy when qualifying thrown in. Get Hamilton on pole leading a race, tough car to overtake at times, and we could see some different results play out. So I think it's good for the sport. I think it's good for the whole, for everybody on the grid, especially McLaren and Danny Rick, but hey, that's where we're at the sport at the moment.
It'd be interesting. Thank you for that. That's really great. And certainly my non-technical mind, that makes it a lot easier to understand. Yeah. It certainly makes sense though, doesn't it? When you look at the spread of the field at the moment and the performance of Ferrari initially were just, see you later. Yeah. The reliability issues that Red Bull had, and now the reliability issues that Ferrari have. Yep. So how does that then play out, do you think? This is like, let's war game it. I like that term. How does that play out then for the rest of the year? Mercedes still have more to give in this engine. They haven't had a reliability issue scare like Red Bull and Ferrari have had all the way up and down their customer teams as well, or customer team being AlphaTauri in this instance. Do you think, we're now just over halfway through the season. It feels like we've done a whole season already, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's been 11 races. So we're going into round 12, I think, or round 13. It's going to be one of them in France.
Yep.
Mercedes have come out in last week and said, look, we actually think there's a real opportunity here for victory going into the French Grand Prix.
Yeah.
That floor thing aside, and let's say that the French Grand Prix, Hungarian Grand Prix, which the next two, we then go on the summer break, the summer shutdown, and then it's the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa.
Yep.
That's the first one back where this rule comes into play. Is there, in your mind, enough racing for the rest of the year for Mercedes dominance to come back to really bring in this championship battle? And the reason I ask that is because looking at the standings at the moment, you've got Max Verstappen on 208 points, then you've got 170 Charles Leclerc, 151 Sergio Perez, 133 Carlos Sainz, and then 128 George Russell, 109 Lewis Hamilton. It might be that George gets some of the luck that he's had this year. Lewis Hamilton, we could probably all agree, for the last 10 years has had all of the luck. You think about Silverstone a couple of years ago, went over the line, 3 wheels. All of these amazing things where you think, how has he done that and Valtteri Bottas has got none of that luck? Maybe the poison chalice has disappeared to Alfa Romeo, and George maybe has an ability at least to catch that second position.
Yeah, man, Lewis has had 3 podiums on the trot now, so the car is getting better. Yes, they've made some progress, and Ferrari's had some issues, as has Red Bull. I mean, Sergio Perez crashing out lap 1. Those things help, but Mercedes are right there. I think the gap's probably too big, but even inter-team battles, if you look at the Hamilton-Rosbergs, there was some massive swings of 45 points, and then over a season, 100 points is not. I mean, all you need is for Red Bull to crash out of 2, and Hamilton or Mercedes capitalise on that, and 50 points, and then that gap comes down a lot. So I think there's a bit more to play out in the season. I don't think it'll change too much, but it will definitely help Mercedes a hell of a lot more than what it will. It will hinder the Red Bulls and the Ferraris moving forward. And then, but the back end of the season, because of the amount of DNFs and Ferrari engine blows up and the problems that Red Bull have had earlier in the season too, that will come back to bite them in the arse at some stage. And it's the last 4 or 5 races where they're going to have to change, 2 or 3 gearboxes and start taking penalties a lot of the time on tracks that are not great for overtaking. That's when Mercedes have to pick their game up and get the job done, really. So who knows?
Who knows?
We'll wait and see. I'll tell you what, it's been a really interesting year from the get-go in the sense that it's been a really tough year to watch.
Yes.
And I know that for Australian fans and even our fans, it's getting a bit jaded F1 at the moment.
Yep.
It's been tough. But this second half of the year, I think we've got all the makings of a really cracking season coming up. I think there's generally 6 drivers on the grid moving forward that can win at any one time. Then you throw your Landos and your Danny Ricks in there who can get results on tracks. We know that. I think McLaren will be good around Monza again because their car's very extreme in one way and it works in Monza. It doesn't work anywhere else. But,
which it did.
I wish it did too, but they're the places that McLaren have learnt too, that to get their car to win a world championship, it needs to be extreme in so many areas. And I think they pushed the boundary too far and going in one direction at the start of this year, which ultimately stuffed them up. So
it's going to be interesting to see how then the next couple of races go. Let's look ahead now to the French Grand Prix. It is a French Grand Prix preview episode. Absolutely your favourite track in the calendar. True or false?
Oh,
false.
This track so much.
Now look, let's just have a look back to what happened last year. Max Verstappen.
Sorry, is the chicane cut out this year or was that last year? They cut out one of the chicanes, so the back straight's even longer than what it was.
It's still that. It still goes into that little kinky chicane. Kinky chicane is a poor use of words. Kinky. Into a chicane in the middle of the back straight. Otherwise, he'd just be sitting there porpoising for a good 40 seconds going, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks.
Insert good kinky porpoising joke there.
It's all gone terribly wrong.
Oh, I'm newly married. My mind's in the gutter.
Yeah, there you go.
Lots of porpoising in the camp household, I can assure you.
Wow, good. Things that I didn't need to know. Or anyone else, really, for that point. Last year, it was an inverse of the Spanish Grand Prix. Spanish Grand Prix, remember, Max Verstappen pitted once, Lewis Hamilton pitted twice, caught him in the second to last lap.
Yep.
In the French Grand Prix, reverse happened. Lewis Hamilton pitted twice, Max Verstappen only pitted once. On 52 of 53, Max managed to get past. So the interesting thing, the other way around. The interesting thing in that is that all of this strategy going into the race will be completely thrown out the window because more often than not, we say it's a one-stop race, French Grand Prix. Tarmac's pretty good with tyres. Degradation isn't as bad. It's not as good as Silverstone, which just happens to absolutely not degrade tyres whatsoever, it looks like. Or even Australia, if you're Alex Albon, you don't need to change tyres whatsoever. But the French Grand Prix, as silly as it looks on television, let's think about it from the new car's point of view. Now, there are a stack of overtaking opportunities if you can get right up behind the car in front, which the 2022 car can do. So my question is, as much as we like, and you have put the French in the bin, fair enough, as much as that's happened, objectively looking at the track, do you think this actually might, with the new regulations, might be one of those tracks that will surprise us and go from being really rubbish to watch and very boring and very bright to actually very
The
decent.
French build submarines like the way they build racetracks. They are fucking shit house. Outdated and technology's rubbish.
They don't build them, you mean?
Yeah, they don't build them.
Specifically
Got
from an
no
Australian point of view.
contracts. Yeah, I hate this track. It's just such a boring track. There is some very high-speed straights and long straights, which I think we can enjoy. But they'll just peg it back by making the DRS lines different to what they were in previous years. We saw at Baku this year. DRS line came so much further forward that, yes, it was still a passing opportunity, but not the passing opportunities that we've seen in previous years. So FIA will combat that. But, geez, I'd love them to leave that DRS way back where it was a couple of years ago. That would be unbelievable in this year's car.
Oh, yeah.
How much strategy would go into that? It's like lap 1 at Spa, right?
Yes.
Down the whatever the straight's called, I can't remember. Camel? No, that's good.
Just name any corner and people will believe you.
Anyway, so look, this track's hard to watch on TV because of there's no gravel traps. It's all red and blue stripy lines. It's just ridiculous. But no, look, I don't think so. If we go this year, I think there's been more pit stops this year. So probably a 2 pit stop race strategy, which is not good for McLaren. What compounds we got? C1, 2, and 3.
I think they're at the
so
extreme.
That's automatically a shit round for McLaren.
Don't quote us on that, but I believe that's
McLaren's good on the harder compound tyres. As soon as they get to the super soft and the soft, they've got no pace. They'll have good pace on the C3 over the race distance, but, when they go to that soft, they'll be 3 laps in and gone. So
now here are the results from last year. Max Verstappen first, Lewis Hamilton second, Sergio Perez third, Valtteri Bottas fourth, Lando Norris fifth, Daniel Ricciardo sixth, Pierre Gasly seventh, Fernando Alonso eighth, Seb Vettel ninth, Lance Stroll 10th. It's an interesting, very Mercedes-heavy, dominant.
Don't have the top speed this year. They just don't have the top speed down the straights. I think you'll see all of the Mercedes cars down the back of the grid this weekend just because top speed is no good. Doesn't matter how much downforce you trim. The engine ain't there. It can't project you up the road, get the torque under the rear wheels and out of the corners quicker than anyone else. So they'll struggle all weekend.
It's going to be one of those things that, as you say, the runoff areas mean that if you do go off, it's not like Austria, where you're going to get punished in a gravel trap like Seb Vettel, which is unfortunate, or any Red Bull on the outside of a Mercedes into turn 4.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that stupid penalty Danny Rick got in the Renault? On the last lap, past like 3 dudes going off track. It wasn't even off track. It
wasn't on the racing line. It was so off the racing line. But he crossed the white line. And
so dumb.
So that's another interesting point. And again, you went on the review episode for the Austrian Grand Prix, but track limits. It was hardcore policing. It was, everything was going on. This is what we've sort of been speaking of, especially Tommy T. Shout out to him, who's in the next room. He's just not interested in being here talking to you lovely people today. But this is what we've said. The white line is the limit of the track. End conversation. So it has to be the same probably for the French Grand Prix too, especially considering that you can just go off a little bit and you're not punished by any gravel or grass.
The only thing I would say is I don't mind on a track like this, you can take a hell of a lot more risk. And the reward could pay off. But if you gain an unfair advantage, police time, that's what we want to see. Interesting to see Masi step down from all of F1 and FIA operations as of last week. So he's moved on and mate, it'd be great to have a chat to that guy, wouldn't it? Because I reckon this year's been just as bad as last year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I was going to, interesting, and bringing it up, it's an interesting one. Masi has announced that he's leaving the FIA. He's released a statement that's basically saying he's leaving the FIA. That's it. Wasn't much of a statement. That he wants to spend more time with his family back here in Australia. Not a bad thing. The FIA sold him out to dry. Regardless if you're a Lewis fan or a Max fan, regardless if you think that you would have made a better decision, you weren't in the chair. We weren't in the chair. And it's all well and good for us to literally be sitting on the couch as couch experts to think about it. But at the end of the day, he was under Charlie Whiting, who was excellent, but he also made that role for himself, basically. Like, no one else could do that role except for Charlie Whiting. So the sudden passing away of Charlie, which is incredibly sad, Michael stood up and did a great job for a long time. Now, there was a whole bunch of context going into his decision and the comment about we went motor racing Toto and all that stuff. And I mean, it's given us great sound bites like Michael. And if you're part of our F1 Fantasy League name competition, great. I mean, you're killing it in that respect. But really for him, outside of that, he was a pretty bloody good race director, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think a big part of this is like you've got to work with the drivers. I mean, they're his number one contact every week and the people racing on this track. He's their representative. He will get things changed if they want things changed. There's consensus, but he's also the decision maker. He's the principal at school, right? He makes all the big calls. And yes, 6 months on from that decision, I'm still frustrated with how it played out. But there is so much more context to what was going on behind closed doors and the conversations they're having that led up to that, which we're not a privy to be a part of. But what we do know is with Sebastian Vettel walking out of the drivers' team meeting is that these drivers don't have respect for the process and the people that are involved at the moment. And I think, like anything, whether it be in life, not just motorsport, respect of your peers and the level of, whatever the position, but the respect from the peers is not there. And the FIA has lost confidence in all the drivers. The drivers have lost confidence in the FIA and the way they're handling things. I think he probably had to go, which is a shame, and we shouldn't, I made some comments last year that 6 months later, and now we're looking at the situation. The FIA has got some big shoes to fill, and they need someone that can go in there and get the respect of the peers. Listen, it's not a dictatorship. You've got to work with people, and I think we're just hearing the rumblings of what's going on behind closed doors at the moment. And I know from a sporting perspective, we would love to see what goes inside some of these meetings, and they've given us some glimpses at times, but I just don't think it's a place where we should have that access, because it's a whole lot more context that we don't fully understand, we don't get. It's for them, and I think it's a shocking, it's a really poor way for that whole thing to end. But I hope he writes a book and he gets to tell his side of the story one day, because his side of the story is going to be very different to that of Mercedes and or Red Bulls and that sort of stuff. There's going to be stuff going on behind closed doors. He may have been pressured from people at the top as well. We don't know if people are making phone calls to him and, during that outside of the teams, and he's been hung out to dry. But hey, let's get him on here and have a chat. That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
I'll certainly try my best to see if Michael Masi wants to come and have a chat with us. It's interesting though, isn't it, that we've now, since then, and since the No Michael No and Toto We Went Motor Racing, we haven't had any comms or any cameras inside the FIA room. But I was just going to ask, from a spectator point of view, do you feel like you've lost anything?
Nope.
No.
Not at all.
Exactly right. So I think F1
Not at all.
It was a necessary decision. I don't know why they kept putting it in there, and there's certainly reports that Michael is a shy guy when it comes to being on camera, can make decisions, and is very well liked amongst the paddock generally.
Still is.
So anyway, it's a bit of a shame. And yes, I mean, if you go back to listen to our episodes from last year, we did put him in the bin a couple of times. It's like we put Pierre Gasly in the bin. Doesn't mean we want him to leave. We just have a hot take sometimes. And we have to remember that the stewards are different to the race director.
Yeah. And it's tough. We want consistency, but then there's no consistency in the sport anywhere across the board. So
no, that's so true.
Other than probably the calendar every year.
Yeah.
That's probably the most consistent part of our sport.
And even then, who knows? Who knows what's going on with next year?
Does Melbourne, changing track, does Melbourne get the opening Grand Prix next year?
No.
So we've blown that?
Yep.
What a damn shame that is.
And also, I'm hearing that Spa is close to being cut from next year.
Spa's on the nose.
Which is ridiculous, I think.
It's everyone's favourite track. Everyone's favourite track. It's the most picturesque track. I mean,
it's radiant, actually.
What else does Belgium do for the world other than Spa?
Ah, there it is. Take the French and the Belgians all in the one episode. This is what you get here at Lakeside Drive. No, I think it would be an absolute damn shame because it's an incredible track. And apart from the fiasco that was last year, that was just ridiculous. And it'd be worth, if Michael, if you're listening, please write a chapter specifically on the pressures that you found around that Grand Prix in Belgium. Well, look, that's our preview of the French Grand Prix. Plenty to happen in the next couple of weeks, Campy. Now, give me your top three. Who's your podium pick for the weekend?
Max, Lewis, Carlos.
Interesting. Carlos V.
That
now,
goes against everything I've said
I know.
about Mercedes being shit this weekend. But Hamilton's on a roll, and you've got to back him to get another podium. If 3 in a row, 4 in a row is very achievable.
Yep, and there's plenty of meat on the tables in there for the Ferrari boys at the moment. Are you starting to see a little bit now, apart from this reliability issue situation, are you starting to see any cracks in this Ferrari team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think where Binotto's bought this team from, after Maurizio Arrivabene, after he left, Binotto, geez, what a challenge. I was very complimentary of him this year, but I think we need to now, where they're at as a team, and they're on the second best car or the best car at any given racetrack, the way that we look and judge Ferrari as an organisation, as a team, what they're doing on track, we're starting to change that now. The parameters have changed, and they're getting closer and closer because, hey, they're in a world championship fight. Binotto's got them where they need to be and where they should be. But now we start to, if you want a world championship, hey, those parameters close in, and they're not there yet. Their reliability, they've got to get on top of that. I think Carlos, he will take more points off Leclerc than Leclerc will get out in front, and that may be what cost them. Although I think Leclerc's been the better driver all year, Carlos can still pull out performances that will take points off Leclerc at times. Leclerc threw it away, though. A couple of races to Silverstone, threw it away twice. And for Carlos to get that win, that was a bit of a kick in the face. That reminded me of the Webber, not bad for a second driver.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think we know where the pecking order is in the team, but I think if Ferrari want to win, they're going to have to cut one of their drivers off and allow Charlie to get up the road as much as he can.
And historically, that's what's happened. Your Rubens to Michael, Eddie Irvine, the others that have been there, and Felipe Massa have potentially almost been the first driver, and then new talents come in around them, and it's been hard to watch.
But then when Ferrari decide who their driver is, second driver, look at Vettel in his last year. Yep. That wasn't because he was driving poorly. No. That was because they made that decision, and hey, they do things to their cars which limits their performance, and that's it.
Well, I think for the French Grand Prix, you're going to see Charles Leclerc on the top step, followed by Carlos Sainz, and then George Russell. Because I feel some Red Bull reliability issues coming. I don't know why. I have absolutely nothing to back that up, but I feel like Red Bull's, they're due for something to happen to them. It sort of seems to be every other race that it happens to Ferrari or Red Bull. Yeah. Certainly Sergio Perez had some issues last time, but anyway, it's going to be interesting. Thank you so much for listening and for watching wherever you are in the world. Don't forget, there's a couple of ways of engaging with us on this podcast. You can join our Discord server. As I said earlier in the episodes, about 350 of us. Great community over a race weekend. We're all chatting. It's fantastic to sometimes it's hard to read when we're like, DR, no, what? Oh, come on, McLaren! There's a lot of that going on at the moment.
Especially when he gets in front at the start.
Yeah.
And then,
he's been told to stay behind. You can also follow us on social media. We've got TikTok, we've got Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter as well. You can find me as well on all of those platforms, Campy, through the Lakeside Drive channels. We just tell him in screenshot what's going on. But it is time to say goodbye. We'll see you next Monday for our review episode of the French Grand Prix. Thanks, mate.
Cheers.
Okay.
Oh.
Happy? No, you're not, but we're going to do it anyway.